Welcome, gentle reader, to Everything is Everything. Amit, 2024 has been such a great year for chess. And for all of us, as the events unfolded, it made us think more about the world and about our culture and our philosophy. So, will you take us through the year? What are the big things that happened? And, let's go a little under the hood and think more about what they mean.
The year in chess, rather. I mean, a lot happened in this year, though the year in chess ended in a slightly ugly manner. I'll talk about that. But it was a great year for Indian chess, great year for chess, period. And, when we were thinking of this episode to kick 2025 off, and Happy New Year, by the way, when we were thinking of this episode to kick 2025 off, I think we both agreed that let's talk about chess in 2024 because it's a great subject. But what also strikes me is that in everything that happened in chess in this year, there is also a life lesson. And it's a fundamental life lesson which is not obvious, it is not easy, it is sometimes counterintuitive. And what I want to attempt to do today is talk about the major chess stories of the year, but in each of them, find a life lesson that goes beyond chess and that goes into our lives.
Is there a trademark, Amit Varma and Ajay Shah?
Life lessons. Well, I mean, why not? We haven't trademarked it because, like, who cares?
For me, it was a remarkable moment when Gukesh got through to the finals. It just felt something. It felt something amazing. I am old enough to remember Anand's journey to the World Championship. This guy is only 18. Okay, your heart goes out to him. It is so difficult. It is such a vortex of emotions to play at World Championship League at age 18. And at the same time, there was no simple rooting for him, and I did not feel tribal feelings of being Indian. Ding is an equally wonderful, flawed character, and you know his journey, you know his story. There is so much that is good and wonderful in him, and I used to just get stuck every match that I couldn't concentrate on other things, and I would just watch the match. And on the last day, I just felt this roller coaster of watching the greatness of Ding and that stumble. It just felt bad. And I was just in this crazy vortex of emotions when the whole thing came to an end. What about you?
I love the match. I love the match. And by the way, general readers, we're going to talk a lot of chess today. I have an episode. We have an episode of the past of Everything is Everything where I've spoken about my love for chess and breaking down the history of the game. So it's almost appropriate that we mentioned every world championship, every world champion all the way up to Ding. And now we are doing this episode where we have a new world champion, which is Gukesh, which is beautiful. But we'll talk about a lot else. We'll also talk about the role of computers in chess, how coverage has changed, how Magnus Carlsen is kind of losing it, and also the wonderful Indian chess revolution and the role of Sagar, Shah and Amruta in that. Admire those two tremendously. We'll talk about all of that. But I want to come back to this match because I so share this emotion. Like during the match, and I think almost every Indian fan will agree with me, that you wanted Gukesh to win, but you also felt kind of bad for Ding. Now, just for perspective, Ding in 2019 became world number 2. He beat Carlsen in a big tournament at that time, and he was just phenomenally strong, just an amazing player. Then COVID happened, the Chinese stopped playing a lot, they stopped traveling a lot, and something happened. Apparently, he had some personal issues in his life, and he mentally kind of wasn't there at the time. Now, Magnus Carlsen decided not to play the World Championship anymore, the Classical World Championship, and we'll come back to that. And in that, candidates, Jan Nepomniachtchi came first, and Ding won his last game against Hikaru Nakamura to leapfrog him to second place. And because Magnus wasn't playing, Ding got a chance to play Nepo, and it was a roller coaster match. Where Ding was behind 3 times, came back each time, and then in the final game of the rapid tiebreak, decided from an even position where he could just have, taken a draw to actually play on for a win and take a risk, and he won that game and he won the World Championship. Flawed chess throughout by World Championship standards, like who am I to pass judgment, but flawed chess throughout, but he won the thing, but then it broke him mentally. And then for a year, wherever he played, he just did very badly. His recent results were terrible. He would just freeze at certain points. He lost confidence. He would get into good positions but not press for a win, and so on and so forth. So it was kind of heartbreaking to see that. Now, I'm going to talk about that particular match for this chapter and the next, but this chapter, I want to focus on the final move, right? Not the final move, but the
The
last
decisive
blunder
move.
that kind of decided it, which in game 14 is 55 rook f2, right? White plays that and white loses because black can trade the rooks and then immediately force a bishop trade, right? And this was a shocking blunder. In isolation, if you are given this position, any halfway decent player will avoid this blunder, right? It won't happen. But I'm saying that this is not an isolated position. If Ding had seen it as an isolated position, there's no way he's going to play that move. It's a ridiculous move. Why did it happen? There was an allegation from the Russian Chess Federation that Ding has thrown the world championship. There's something shady. I'll come back to the Russians later. But that's not the case. I want to talk about this blunder and derive a life lesson from what happened to Ding here, right? That particular position where black has a pawn extra in a king and pawn ending with rooks and bishops on the board is a theoretical draw unless the rooks and the bishops are exchanged off. Both of those, both rooks, both bishops, if they are exchanged off, and even then some positions may be a draw, but that is the only path to victory. Now here on the screen, you will see the position on the board after move 46, right? This is sort of the configuration that they have, and now they are just moving around. All Ding has to do is not make a blunder and not exchange both of those, and it is, of course, in his hands. So there is no issue, right? Now, they play around in this position for a while, and Gukesh is going to continue pressing, and I'm going to come back to why, which is important. He would just press in every game and take it to the limit. So even though it's a theoretical draw, he continues to press, and Ding, almost in autopilot, assumes that unless something major happens, is going to be a draw. And he's now mentally, I think, shifted to the tie break because those are rapid and blitz, in which he is considered the favorite, right? Though I think not by such a huge margin as so many people say, but he's clearly the favorite. So in his mind, it's okay. It is safe. The rooks and the bishops can't be traded off, right? Now I take you to the position after move 52. Now, if you look at this position, here also they're just playing around, nothing much has changed. And the only way Gukesh can win is if the rooks get traded off and then he can force a bishop trade. Now, forcing a bishop trade is impossible here for two reasons, right? One is that the white bishop can just move out. The moment he, Gukesh offers a trade, the white bishop can just move out of the way. It is not a problem. The second reason why a bishop trade can't be forced is that his bishop has to be supported by something. Look at where the king is. It is 2 squares away from where, it would need to be to support the bishop. This is move 52, right? And they are just playing, they're going through the motions. By move 54, subtly, these two conditions have changed. The bishop is now in A8, where it can be trapped because that is the only diagonal open to it. And Gukesh's king has actually moved 2 squares, so it can support the bishop, going on that diagonal and forcing a bishop trade. But the rooks are still there, so it's not a problem. But it is at this moment that Ding, who has kind of normalized the previous equilibrium in his head, makes 55 rook f2. And here's the thing, it looks like an obvious mistake, but Ding did not realize it at the time, and Gukesh did not realize it for a few seconds. You notice Gukesh kind of looking, and Gukesh said in an interview later that he was going to play rook b3 and he didn't see, and then suddenly he sees it. And if you look at the coverage now, you'll find that he realizes it. And then he goes forward to look at it. And he's like, oh my God, am I really winning this thing? And then Ding sees Gukesh's reaction, and then Ding realizes what has happened. So both these super strong grandmasters were stuck in the old equilibrium. Neither of them realized what has happened. Even though every commentator in the world did, because the engine showed that swing. But I'll come back to that later also.
And also, it's easier to be a commentator.
Yeah, I'll come back
When
to
you're
that.
in there, you're in the pressure cooker.
I'll come back to that. But the thing is that the commentators had the computer as a crutch. And if you just look at the position in isolation, rook f2 is obviously a blunder. But both of their heads were stuck in the old paradigm. And just imagine, Gukesh could actually have played rook b3 and the moment would have passed. But, he saw it. And then the way he reacted is because in his mind also, in Gukesh's mind also, he had assumed it's going to be a draw, they're going to play the tiebreak tomorrow. And suddenly he realizes that, oh my God, I'm going to win the world championship now. And you see him laughing, and later you see him smiling, suppressing a smile. Later you see him crying, and it's just beautiful. But what I want to say is the blunder wasn't such a crazy blunder. It is not that case of how can a GM make such a blunder. Chess games get decided because blunders and mistakes get made. But what is a larger life lesson I want to draw from this? And the larger life lesson I want to draw from this is that the world is not a static place. Too often in our lives, in some domain or the other, maybe in the field in which we work, maybe in our relationships, the king moves 2 squares and the bishop goes to a8, right? And we don't realize that. And I think that is super important, that mentally all the time we get stuck with one view of the world and then everything changes and we don't realize that it has changed. It could happen to you in your field, for example, if you have a particular specialization and you master that, and then suddenly AI takes it over and you didn't see it coming and you didn't retrain for something else and you can't do anything else. It can happen in a relationship. Two young people can fall in love and get married, but both of them are constantly changing and they have to be alive to each other and to these changes. And true love, in fact, is accounting for these changes and growing together. But you have a fixed view of the other person has a fixed view of you, and suddenly you're strangers in the same house. And after 20 years, you're like, what the fuck happened, right? So in various domains of our life, this is something we should be on the watch out for. I mean, we can't be updating our priors every minute. It is not possible. It takes too much cognitive energy. But we get settled into a groove really often, and we don't realize that the world has changed. And then suddenly rook F2.
The great philosopher Bill Gates says that the world changes by less than you think in 1 year and more than you think in 10 years. And I think this is the sort of thing. All of us have a tremendous status quo bias. There are too many crazy novel things being written about, and we tend to just brush it off. Think, that's okay, that can happen, that can happen, that can happen. I'm leading my life, I'm in a status quo bias. It's really difficult to wake up and kick yourself in the butt and say, no, now I'm in a different place and we need to change course. So this is really like one of the great life skills.
Another way of saying what Gates said is we overestimate the short term and we underestimate the long term. So in the short term we think, अरे सब बदल जाएगा, मैं वीडियो बनाऊंगा, वायरल हो जाएगा, ये हो जाएगा, वो हो जाएगा. Nothing happens. But in the long term, things change so suddenly and so abruptly that it takes you by guard. So often the small changes we might notice, that, but the big changes, sometimes they happen and you don't see them coming and it's behind you.
Yeah. And speaking for me personally, as a very low quality chess player, it came as a surprise, the idea that when there's a bishop in a8, in a way it's trapped. It has no place to run. In every other place, it has so many choices, a bishop can just get away. But when you're in a8, you're just dominating one diagonal, and if somebody stands there, you have no choice but to exchange. So we are used to that, bishops hanging around in the middle game and you get fianchettoed. It's very cute. We've never thought about how there are places where bishops are dramatically less flexible than other places.
Actually, the bishop on that diagonal, the h1 to a8 diagonal, is supremely powerful because that diagonal is supremely important. It is only in this particular instance that a world championship hangs on the balance of whether you exchange or you not, and he got forced into an exchange. It's an unusual situation, and well, what do you do? So before getting to my second lesson, I want to talk about the match a bit, right? People commented on the match that, even though the accuracy ratings were extremely high as per the computer, various people commented that, oh, the standard wasn't so high, etc., etc. Magnus Carlsen said some things in his commentary, etc., etc. And the players would admit that it wasn't, but in the high pressure of a world championship match, it is really difficult to play the kind of top quality chess you might play in a random tournament where not everything matters. But to me, it is not the quality of the chess that decided the match. Both of them made mistakes. Ding made the last mistake. Shit happens, right? What decided the match is things that are slightly adjacent to it. Specifically, two things. And the first of those is preparation, and the second of those is attitude, right? And Ding went wrong in both of these. In preparation, he went wrong in two ways. He had a really small team. Gukesh had a fantastic team helping him out, and I'll talk about that soon. But Ding had a small team and he wasn't really super well prepped. So what would typically happen through the matches, he'd be surprised in the opening and then he would spend an hour, hour and a half, but he'd think really well in that time, and but then he would bash out, perfect moves in no time at all after that. But he had to spend that energy because he was constantly surprised in the opening, and the opening prep wasn't quite up to it. But the second kind of prep that was not up to it was physical prep. Right? He wasn't physically fit enough. Physical fitness is enormously important. When I was a junior in the early 1990s, one thing that I knew is, one factoid that I knew is that in one standard game of chess, which in those days was 5 hours in those time controls, a chess player would lose as many calories as a boxer in a round of boxing. Right? It is enormously physically exhausting. Vishy Anand famously used to do yoga and keep himself fit. Magnus Carlsen plays a bunch of sports. Gukesh plays a bunch of sports. Ding doesn't seem to have done much, and Gukesh noticed. Right? Gukesh noticed because he said later after the match that our strategy was to make every game as long as possible. So every single game, Gukesh is just playing on, playing on, playing on. The idea being that at some point, fatigue will hit and Ding will crack. And this happened right at the end of the last regulation game, in game 14, where Ding did crack. Like when I look at Ding's mistake, it is not pressure, because in that moment, there is no pressure. He really believes that he sealed the draw. In that moment, it is fatigue, that he doesn't update those priors as often as he needs to. So again, this is something invisible to the non-chess player, and I hadn't noticed this aspect of it, but Gukesh had. Gukesh said he was looking tired, so we decided I will make him play for as long as possible. Two aspects of preparation. And the second point that I want to point out is attitude. Ding came in there with a slightly diffident attitude that, and this was something plaguing him in previous tournaments, including in the Olympiad before this, where Ding's attitude sorta kinda was that even in a good position where he can push, or where only two results are possible, a draw and Ding winning, he would just chill out and he would allow the draw. He wouldn't press too hard for a win. Right? And this is contrary to what all the Indian players do, and I'll talk about them, but and what all great GMs should do, in fact. And he would sort of not care too much. He would lose the initiative. Even in the final game 14, he went too early for a draw. He actually lost a pawn deliberately because he said, oh, 2 pawns versus 1 is a theoretical draw. And he needn't have done that. He just wanted to avoid playing on, possibly because he was also tired. So his attitude was diffident. And you see a great illustration of this in game 6. In game 6, Ding has a superior position, slightly superior position, and he tries to offer a draw through a threefold repetition. And in a seminal moment, Gukesh, who has a slightly worse position, declines the draw and he goes for the win. And of course, he doesn't win, but that's not the point, right? I mean, the game ends in a draw, if I remember correctly.
Psychological
but
warfare.
It doesn't win. Gukesh's thing is that I am just playing. I am here to play chess. I'm just going to play till the end. I'm going to tire you out. I am younger than you. I have energy, right? And also, Gukesh spends time organizing a brilliant team. A couple of years before this, Anand suggests that he worked with Gregor Gayevsky, also known as Gayu. Right? Gayevsky used to be Anand's second, excellent guy, the perfect person to be the head of the team. Then they start getting other people in, right? Jean-Christophe Duda, who did pretty well in the World Bids that happened recently, really strong Polish grandmaster, plays more than 300 practice games with Gukesh. And in a sense, Duda was world top 10 before Gukesh was, and a couple of years back, Duda was there, Gukesh was there. So it's like he's a really strong player, right? And he does that. Then Radoslav Wojtaszek, who was also Anand's second at one point, joins the team. Slight Polish band kind of happening here. Hari Krishna joins the team. Again, Hari Krishna was once world number 10, really strong player. Now past his prime as a player, but part of the coaching team of both the men's and women's world championships. Joe Benjun also, right? So really good at the prep, gets the job done. And they got this young German talent called Vincent Kemmer. And this is really interesting because what Gukesh did was he didn't invite any of the other great Indian talents like Arjun Erigaisi or Pragnananda or Nihal Sareen to be part of his team. And you would imagine that that's fair enough. They are all rivals. Why should they share prep with each other? Any one of them could be playing him for a world championship one day. So you'd imagine the same logic would apply to Vincent Kemmer. Vincent Kemmer, however, had a different attitude. He had a great attitude. He's like, I will learn a lot from this and let me go in for the experience. And he's, I think, 16 or 17. And he's been trained by Peter Lecco. Peter Lecco is a theoretician, a genius, a great player who once led a world championship match against Vladimir Kramnik 6-5. Kramnik had to draw the last game. had to win the last game to draw the championship. And in those days, if you finish with an even score, you won. And the incumbent won, and therefore Kramnik managed to win the last game. Bit of a tragedy. So Kemer was there. Some of the spectacular, like, the two spectacular innovations I remember from here, and I'll talk more about innovations later, actually came from Kemer as part of the training team. So Gukesh was fully there. He had a great team. All these seconds were in Spain, manipulating the time zone in such a manner that they can work while he sleeps and vice versa. I mean, I don't know what the exact math was, but it fit exactly. So only Gajewski was with him, and Gajewski was coordinating with these other guys. So you had great prep happening. But beyond the great prep, you also had brilliant strategy that, oh, he looks physically tired, let me keep playing. And oh, he doesn't seem keen to play even in a winning position, fine, apun khelega. Right? And those made the difference. And the life lesson I want to draw from this is being good is not enough. It's the stuff that goes around it that matters. It's the game outside the game, right? Just because you're very good at something doesn't mean jack shit. You're not entitled to anything. You have to put in the work. You have to get the other stuff right. Are you physically fit? Are you mentally on the ball? What is your attitude? All of that matters. Mere expertise, mere excellence doesn't matter, which is an important point I want to underscore because people get complacent. I don't think Ding got complacent. I just feel that he was dealing with so many other kind of problems that he couldn't quite put it all together. And his status as, as Gukesh very gracefully said after the World Championship, that whatever anyone says about Ding, to Gukesh, Ding is a true world champion. And I echo that sentiment completely. Great player, creative player. He went out there and he fought when no one expected him to fight like this given his recent travails.
Yeah. So I want to add two things to this that I was thinking about these days. One was just now when you were talking about that slide into the frame of mind that, okay, chalo, game 14 is a draw and I'm just going to like go through the motions and we're going to switch into a completely different format, and in a way you're almost gearing up your mind for a different kind of battle. It kind of reminded me of a conversation we had in our hiking episode, that the worst accidents happen when you think you've almost reached home. So, you let your guard down, you think it's kind of done and you're not fighting as hard. The keenness of mind, that the mind that you bring at move 10, by move 50 you're kind of switched off, you're not fighting as hard. So I thought that was a similar thing to what we had talked about in our hiking episode. The second thing I thought, I also read all the same things about the team and all that, and it of course fit my ways of thinking around firms, that there is something interesting and powerful in assembling labor and capital into complex working arrangements. And then it is fascinating that first, that intergenerational transfer from Anand to Gukesh. Okay, the fact that there was an Anand made a difference. It brought knowledge, it brought culture. Okay, so I feel a lot about many things I've seen in India. So in a way, my life story and a lot of things I've seen around me has been that sort of intergenerational transfer, that we get better, but we are helped by the people who came before. And in a way, the limitations of the people who came before are an upper bound on what we can do. And then we hand down some better things to the people who come behind us. And in this, I was fascinated with a completely multinational team. Okay, so it would have been easy to be a little more clubby and have the comfort of the relationships and sharing biryani at night with an all Indian team. But instead, it was like almost entirely, other than Hari Krishna, it was an entirely global team saying you want to play at that number one level, you have to do what it takes. So like Duda was brought in because I think he's world number 7 right now in rapid, and that was to overcome a particular deficiency. So they didn't think in terms of nationality, they just said we got to get a job done, and they built a multinational team. So I'd like to say to you, gentle reader, that if you're building a great firm in India, please consider hiring a lot of expats.
In fact, that's a great point about Duda, because Duda, in an interview just yesterday, we are recording this, by the way, on the 3rd of January. Duda, in an interview that I saw just yesterday, he was asked about the World Championship match by Sagar Shah. And he said, okay, I played a lot of games with him, but I'm not sure that made a difference to the match. But had there been the tie break, you might have seen the difference.
So I thought in many games, as you came towards the end with time pressure, it's the same. I mean, once you have extreme time pressure, it's the same instantaneity of judging a position and not calculating. So I felt that, rapid training goes into that.
To some extent, yes. To some extent, not quite, because even if you get into time pressure with 5 minutes left in a
So
classical
3
game,
minutes.
you might say that it's the same as a blitz game because you have 5 minutes there. But here you've spent 2 hours thinking about the position and the nuances and everything. So it's slightly different. Like, a classic example of someone who would get into severe time trouble in classical but was world blitz champion twice is Alexander Grischuk. So it's kind of interesting how time pressure plays out. And also, that was a wonderful point about how accidents happen when your mind switches off. Like when we did the hiking episode, I referred to the book Traffic by Tom Vanderbilt, where he points out that a large proportion of traffic accidents happens when you're really close to home. Because that's when you mentally switch off, you're almost home, in your mind you're home, and your alertness goes away. So that's another important lesson.
Okay, Amit, tell me more about what we learned about Indian chess in 2024. You only talked about Gukesh. What about the great Arjun? What about that amazing bouquet of greatness that we see in India today?
No, firstly, it's a story that's been happening for a while. Secondly, it's real. It's not hype. It's real. You see that from the fact that there were 3 Indians playing in the candidates and none of them was Vishy Anand, right? You had Gukesh who qualified at the last moment, but you also had Vidit Gujarati and you also had Pragnananda who qualified for the candidates in 2023 by being runners-up to Carlsen, in the World Cup. And there in the quarterfinals, if I remember correctly, Prag beat Arjun Erigaisi in the tiebreak. And there's an interesting counterfactual because whoever won the tiebreak would have been in the candidates. And it's interesting to think of what would happen if Arjun was there given his strength. But anyway, the candidates happened. Gukesh won. Mind blowing. That wasn't all. We played the Olympiad. We went to the Olympiad and the Indian team absolutely, destroyed the other teams, the men's team and even the women's team won. I shouldn't say the men's team, the open team, because both men and women can play in the open section. And the women's team also won, so you had a double gold medal. And I'll come back to that performance in a bit. And then you had Gukesh winning the world championship, and you had Arjun Erigaisi becoming the second Indian after Vishy Anand. And I think the 14th or 15th person, I forget exactly, to reach 2800 in rating. Like right now when we are recording is 2800, but in the live ratings, he reached a peak of 2809, which and was world number 2 to Magnus Carlsen, who was something like 2830, 2831. It's a phenomenal achievement, not just in terms of the bare achievement ki 2800 pass kiya, but also in the how. So I'll come to that. I want to talk about Gukesh and Arjun, the kind of players they are individually. They are extraordinary, right? Gukesh absolutely deserves to be world champion, and I won't be surprised if Arjun gets there and becomes world number 1 as well, right? Let's talk about Gukesh first. There's a very interesting video, if you find it, I'll link it here, but from his earlier coach Vishnu Prasanna, where he talks about how he went to Gukesh's parents when Gukesh was a boy and said, let's do an experiment, let's train him without computers. Now, computer pedagogy plays a part in every chess player coming up. Everybody uses that incredibly powerful tool, and for good reason, and there's nothing wrong in it. But Vishnu Prasanna tried this experiment whereby until the time Gukesh became a GM, he apparently did not use computers at all. Now, and after that, of course, he started using like everyone, because you have to. But until he became a GM, he didn't use computers. Now, I don't know whether it is a consequence of this, but because of that, his calculation skills are phenomenal. You give him a complicated position in the middle game, there is no one better than him. There is no one better than him. Even Magnus Carlsen has said that sometimes I will be discussing the game after the game with Gukesh, and he would have thought of lines that didn't even cross my mind. He is just tremendous. He nails it down. Gukesh's dad, in fact, said that this World Championship match was a bit surprising because Gukesh got into good positions early, partly because of the great prep. Normally, Gukesh is slightly inferior after the opening, but then middle game, he just absolutely kills it, right? However, there is not a downside to this per se, but a weakness people have pointed out, which is that his positional intuitions are a bit weird. And Carlsen particularly has pointed this out, that he will often not make basic positional errors and not do stuff that is instinctive for most grandmasters. Why is this? I don't know. I don't know whether it has something to do with training without computers. But one reason for this could be that while all the other Indians of his generation, like Arjun Prag, Nihal Sareen, Ronak Sadhwani, were playing online a lot of online blitz. You would go to Title Tuesdays circa 2020, 2021. I remember all their names, there'd be 4 or 5 Indians in the top 5. Never Gukesh's name. He didn't play that much, right? And the result, and that could be a reason that the positional instinct isn't great, or it could be the other way around, that because the positional instinct isn't great and allegedly isn't great rather, he's not good at, or rather his rating isn't high in rapid and blitz. If you look at his rating in rapid and blitz, he's 100, 150 points below the top guys. And of course, he's world number 5 in classical right now. He's right up there. So it's a steep drop off, right? And this similar steep drop off was actually seen with Fabiano Caruana, who is a player perhaps closest to this. And Caruana went on to become a super strong player in both rapid and blitz. Again, like in the World Blitz Championship recently, he won his first 7 games and then he qualified for the final 8, where he lost to Duda, if I remember correctly, and Duda played really well. So Caruana overcame that, and with Gukesh, I feel it might be a bit unfair, because the reason his rating is so low in rapid and blitz is he doesn't play much of it. If he plays it, will he be good in it? We don't really know. People assume that had that 14th game been drawn and he played the rapid and blitz tiebreak with Ding, then he would have, he would have been the underdog massively. I'm not sure he would have been the underdog in such a huge way, but it is what it is, and I don't want to speculate too much on the causes, but I feel that definitely not playing enough blitz and rapid has something to do with that lack of positional instinct, though that might be overstated, and also the brilliant calculation skills. Perhaps some of it could be inherent, but some of it could have to do with the self-discipline of having to figure every position out yourself instead of using the crutch of the computer, right? That's Gukesh. Arjun is unique. Arjun is just unique in a mind-blowing way. When Arjun reached 2700, like when a chess player reaches 2700 and 2720, when they get to that level, what tends to happen is that they have reached the top 25-30 in the world and they start getting invitations to Super GM round robins. Now, Super GM invitational round robins are typically, you call 8 players and they'll play like a double round robin, 7 games against, each player plays everyone else twice. You have a 14-game tournament. That's a kind of typical format. Or you get 10 players, like in the Sinquefield Cup, used to have the structure, and then everybody plays everybody else and you have 9 games. And everybody is of equal strength there normally. So what happens in those games is that because you're playing players as strong as you or slightly stronger, you tend to try for equality with black, and with white you push, but a draw is also okay. But you push with white, but with black you are happy with a draw. And therefore, if there is a 10-round super invitational with 2700 GMs, a score of 6 is decent enough, right? It's +2 basically. You got 2 wins more than losses, and it's considered perfectly decent, 6 out of 10. Arjun did not get those invites. Why did Arjun not get those invites? Because there were too many Indians already in the fray. Pragnananda was making waves. He beat Carlsen repeatedly in the shorter time formats. Vidit was very strong. Vidit at one point was the #1 ranked Indian when Anand went down a bit and Vidit went past 2750. So there were other Indians up there in the fray. Nihal Sareen was doing really well, especially in the rapid plus blitz combined events. And Hari Krishna was still decently ranked. So for all kinds of reasons, it's like if you're going to have a tournament with 10 people, you're really not going to call 4 Indians. And these invitations are decided sometimes a year in advance. So when he's 2700, it's not like they can call him then. They can then plan for the next year's tournaments. So he's past 2700. He's a super GM, but he's not being able to play other super GMs in these invitationals. So he has to go to opens. What is an open tournament? An open tournament is a tournament where 100, 200 people will play. There'll be strong players. You have a Swiss system, which is a beautiful system, where people play, people are paired against players at a similar point. So if you've got, after 6 rounds, if you've got 5 points, you'll be paired against someone who's either 5 or 5.5 or 4.5. That's it. So, like that, the field narrows down to a little pyramid. And Arjun had no option but to play those. But the problem was that everybody was lower rated than him. There were 2650s, 2600s, 2550s. And for him to draw a game would be to lose a bunch of rating points. So his rating will just slip and he'll go down. One draw and two wins will probably, lose him ratings overall. And there, in a 10-round tournament, he'd have to score 8. I'm coming up with these numbers loosely just for the sake of illustration. Every open doesn't need that, every invitational isn't like that. But if in an invitational you can look to draw with black and push with white and 6 out of 10 is enough, in an open tournament you have to try to win every freaking game. How did this affect Arjun? This affected Arjun because he became a super aggressive player, doing really creative things, taking risks, going beyond. And 2600 grandmasters are also strong. You take risks with
It's not a
them.
small matter.
Yeah, you take risks with them, you do something slightly suboptimal, they will also punish you, right? It's a big deal. But yet, he gathered up the points against him with a playing style which was so wild that Magnus Carlsen referred to him as a madman, right? And with that style, he went from around 2700 past 2800. No other player has done this in my knowledge. I can't even think of a player dominating 2600, 2650 grandmasters like this. Vaguely I think of Bobby Fischer back in the days when he played Bent Larsen and Mark Taimanov and even Petrosian, 6-0, 6-0 and I think 6-2 against Petrosian. Then perhaps you could say that, okay, it's a similar level of dominance, but for a limited period of time against three guys who he got psychological dominance over. Arjun doing this for a year and a half in opens against 2600, 2650 players who are also strong and many of them are former 2700s. It is not easy. It is mind blowing. And people have speculated that with this style, can he now cut it at the highest level? Can he play the 2700s and all that? And wherever he comes up against strong players, he does pretty well. He's not losing rating anywhere really. So I think he will do well, and this style makes him kind of unique. And one of the things that happened at the Olympiad, to go back to that, is at the time of the Olympiad, Gukesh wasn't world champion. Arjun was India number one. But the coach of their team is this brilliant young man called Srinath Narayanan. And Srinath decided that Arjun should play board 3. He's a top-ranked Indian player, but he shouldn't play board 1, he should play board 3. Why board 3? Because he's brilliant at beating 2600s, and board 3 is where he's likely to play them. So Srinath's reasoning is, let Arjun play board 3, and if he can perform at the same level against him that he's been doing,
We'll rack up points.
we'll win. If the rest of the guys just draw, it's okay, we will win. So Arjun did that, massive dominating performance, and Gukesh on top board got something like 10 out of 11, perhaps the greatest Olympiad performance of all time, if I'm not mistaken. And that is when you realize, like, this kid is not a flash in the pan. 2 consecutive Olympiads he dominated top board. Both those Olympiads he beat Fabiano Caruana, who is the world number 2. And in this Olympiad, for example, when India played China, everybody thought, we'll get a Ding versus Gukesh before the World Championship match. Ding had lost the previous game, I think, against Vietnam to Le Quam Liam, or I don't remember the details, but he wasn't in a good mood and he backed out for whatever reason. So Wei Yi played played Gukesh. And Wei Yi was actually the number 1 ranked Chinese player. And until that game, in the last calendar year, Wei Yi had the best performance rating in the world, ahead of Magnus Carlsen, ahead of everyone else. And he reached an equal position with Wei Yi. And then Gukesh played this miraculous endgame. Like, it's like ridiculous. And we'll, link videos on it from the show notes, where he just won miraculously. And where all the, standard Kharoos guys who don't like to give credit where it's due, even they said, like, my God, Nakamura praised it greatly and said it's amazing. Everybody went gaga over that game. So this is not, an aberration. But what is the life lesson here? My life lesson is about the circumstances which shaped Gukesh and Erigaisi as players. That Gukesh plays without a computer, calculation skills are great, and perhaps doesn't play enough rapid and blitz and gets that sample size, so maybe positional instincts suffer. Arjun is forced into this situation. He would not have chosen it otherwise. Is forced into this situation.
His hunger shaped him.
Yeah, and then that situation where he has to go for a win in every game shapes him as a player. And my larger point is, what you do shapes who you are, right? And this might sound banal and even obvious, but it is not. We don't often think about it. The people we hang out with, they shape us. What we do shapes us. I have written an essay about the importance of form. that when I started doing long form podcasting, the seen and the unseen, we've done a 10-hour episode, you have episodes lasting many hours. It demands a certain kind of patience. It demands listening. It demands curiosity that changes the content, that could even change character. It makes you a different kind of person. It's a whole different ball game. And I'll get the recommendation of this episode over with now. It's a great film called The Disciple by Chaitanya Tamhane, right? And The Disciple stars a guy called Sharad Nerulkar. And he's a music student and later a music teacher, and he's a purist. He doesn't like the commercial world. So there is a scene where he is at his class where he teaches music, and the mother of one of the students is waiting patiently to talk to him, and then the mother and the student come, and she says that, sir, I have a question for you, that my son, he wants to join a college band, but he says he won't join unless you give him permission. So Nerulkar says, okay, what is a band like? What are you supposed to do? So he says it's a college fusion band. There is one guy who will sing in English, he'll sing Western rock and all that. I will do my Hindustani classical as you've taught me, I will do all of that. So what should I do? And the mother by now indicates that I really want my boy to do this. So Nerulkar turns to the boy and he says, yes, you can join them. Moment of silence, and then he adds, but don't come for class anymore, right? And this might seem almost bizarre, going too far, but the point is that what you do shapes what you are. That is different, this is different. He says you're not anywhere near ready to sing Khayal. It takes years of practice, and then it's a boy's choice. Who does he want to be? Because that is a choice here. It's not about what you want to do, it's who do you want to be. And we face that choice every day in how we spend our time. If I'm scrolling, swiping, doing easy time pass, my mind is in a different kind of rhythm, right? But if I'm doing something with Therav, I'm reading a book, I'm watching good world cinema like The Disciple by Chaitanya Tamhane, then I am in a different frame of mind. And that is a grand lesson to learn, that a lot of the things that happen to us, our character, our talent, our family circumstances, we can't control them. Some things we can control. And we should realize that all these choices we make, who do we hang out with, what do we choose to do, what is the manner of our riyas, all of that shapes us and makes us who we are. And we need to keep that in mind.
In addition, I want to say that it is interesting and important for us to be self-aware of the oddities of our own origin story. Okay, we each of us have an origin story, and it has some things that you could consider good, and it has some things that you would consider bad. So imagine if we become more self-aware, not beating yourself up, not whining about it, but just know thyself. Then you will understand that, okay, look, I am this, I came through this journey, and so these are the things I'm good at, these are the things I'm bad at. And then again, you get to make all those choices. Do you want to compensate for some of the things that you're bad at, because actually longevity is going up and we can change, we are malleable, we can do all kinds of things? Or do you want to roll the dice and take big bets around the things that you're actually good at? These are all the grand questions. Okay, Amit, in all this, tell us, why did Magnus leave the World Championship?
So Magnus Carlsen decided he doesn't want to play the Classical World Championship anymore. He left it, and then Ding won it, and then Gukesh won it, right? This, to me, doesn't lessen Gukesh's achievement. He played everyone who was there. In the candidates, he finished as a winner ahead of Fabiano Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura, Jan Nepomniachtchi. He beat everyone who was there in front of him. It's a tremendous achievement. Let's not, downplay that. Let's talk about chess itself. What's happening in chess, right? Carlsen did not quit the World Chess Championship out of petulance. Carlsen had a reason for it, which is he looked at the way chess was evolving and he didn't like it, and he said, I don't want to be part of this classical thing anymore. Now, let's talk about why that is. When you start playing chess, when you fall in love with chess, you do it because of the enjoyment. All the pieces moving in different ways, you're putting together combinations, you are building pawn structures if you're the positional kind of player, you're doing all of that, you're outwitting another person the way I outwit you the one time we played chess. Ajay Shah is there on record as well. So you play for the love of chess, right? Now, over time, theory grows. So fine, theory grows, there is theory, there will be theory, that's inevitable. You learn the theory, you get past it, theory stops at some point, from then you're playing. What has happened with the rise of computer pedagogy is that theory has grown at an exponential pace, and that therefore the amount of preparation you need to do is massive. And here's the thing about computers. It is not as if, if computers are there, all you need to do is mug up the best line and every game is going to be a draw. What typically happens is that a computer will give you an option of various lines, and its evaluation of that line is based on perfect play from the other person. But the other person is human. They never play perfectly. So what therefore happens is that all the main lines and all the openings are well known to everyone and memorized, and they've gone deeper and deeper into the branches. So what players try to do when they play each other is deviate somewhere with a move that is not the optimal move, but to which the riposte can only be found by another computer and not by a human on the board. And then you use creativity in trying to find moves like that, which take your opponent out of his preparation and which might even be objectively bad moves, but how do you find the response to it on the board? So all chess innovation and classical chess really comes down to this. So what Carlsen realized is that for every world championship, the preparation is mad. The world championship match would happen once every 2 years. 6 months before the world championship match, Carlsen and his team and the challenger and his team would do camp after camp, and they'd just prep, and you'd basically have to know everything, because if your opponent got a slight edge, if they took you into a line in which they knew the computer line and you didn't, you could lose, right? Because you then have to figure it out over the board like a computer. And the drudgery was too much. He played a match with Fabiano Caruana. It was tied after the regulation 12 games. They played a tiebreak. Magnus won because he's better at that. Similar match against Karyakin. Karyakin actually shocked him in a particular game and took the lead. Magnus came back and in the last game chose not to press for a win because he figured that he's such a big favorite in the faster formats that he can play those. Did that against Jan Nekomniachtchi either. And then he said, the quality of my life has gone to bits. I am spending 6 months doing this drudgery. This is not even chess. This is mugging up, mugging up, mugging up. The joy of playing chess isn't there. So he decided to quit the World Championship, right? And at first, he started playing a lot of Rapid and Blitz. Rapid is approximately half an hour each, but 15 minutes each with increment is also Rapid, etc., etc. And Blitz would be 5-minute games each or 3 minutes with increment. That's kind of the blitzing. And once you factor in time, some of the prep goes out of the window because you can't possibly remember everything, and therefore you can easily find playable positions where you can play. And the kind of player Carlsen is, he's like, I'll even take a slightly inferior position. I just want to play because I can outplay anyone. And that was a deal, so he left. And recently what has happened is that he gave this interview, we'll link again, where he talks about freestyle chess. Now what is freestyle? Freestyle is a new name for what we would call Fischer Random or Chess 960. Bobby Fischer came up with this new form of chess, feeling exactly the same drudgery, that I'm tired of mugging up openings. This was in the 70s. And Fischer Random was that you have the same chessboard, the pawns are where they are, but the pieces behind the pawns are shuffled up in random, and they're shuffled up the same for both players. And it's called chess 960 because there are 960 such possible starting positions. Now all your preparation goes out of the window. In many cases, some heuristics also go out of the window. You have to figure out the basics of each position on its own. It's an entirely new ball game. And Magnus has now started a world freestyle tour. What he's calling this freestyle because, to him, this is the most active form of chess, and classical doesn't matter anymore. Now, the question to ask there is he right? And I would say yes and no. He is right to the extent that that move has happened, it has become drudgery. But I would also say no to the extent that, the Gukesh Ding match was great. We have had the Olympiad was great. If it was really such drudgery and only about, going by computer lines and all that, then India should not have won despite having the best players. Classical chess is alive. Look at the way Arjun Erigaisi plays, right? Like a madman, as Carlsen said. So, reports of his death, I think, are exaggerated. However, it might be a case of overestimating the short term and underestimating the long term, where I think it will not die anytime soon, but it will die one day, because what do you do? This is a way, like for every new player, think of the mountain of knowledge you first have to internalize before you actually can begin to play and get playable positions. Now, what is the lesson in this? And the life lesson that I draw out of this is that mastery is good, renewal is better, right? Too often I find that in people what happens is that they master a particular form and then they get into a groove and they are stuck to that form and they stop thinking in a fresh way. This is what Magnus, militated against, where he said that, no man, I want the joy of playing chess. That's why I came into this. I'm happy to be world number one. I can maintain that shit. I can be world champion, and get the enormous prize monies for that. But I want to play chess, right? He chose renewal over mastery. Note that in chess 960, there have been 2 world championships, if I remember correctly, where Magnus has played and he has lost to Wesley So and to Hikaru Nakamura, right? So he's not guaranteed dominance like in classical chess. But to his credit, he said that, hey, I just want to play chess. I love playing chess. And hey, I'll prove myself. And therefore, he's kind of chosen this. And I think this is important to all of us as a lesson, that we'll gain mastery in something and then we will continue doing that. And then we'll become automatons and we won't refresh our knowledge. Someone could learn brain surgery, but 20 years later, he could be doing brain surgery the same way, not having read the latest papers on the subject or updated his skills. You as an economist chose to go into health economics as well. You have a deep engagement with the law. In various ways, you have been renewing yourself. I try to do the same thing. Don't just do one thing. Everything is everything. But, we get into that situation where we think mastery is enough. And I'm saying, no, mastery ain't enough. You got to go a little beyond. You got to keep renewing yourself.
So I want to say two things here. One is, once again, the issue of longevity. That the old culture was maybe okay when, you would peak at 40, 50, and then anyway you are fading. So it was fine to ply one trade for your whole life. But once you double the longevity, suddenly it becomes far more dreary. And then, all of us should be looking for a better quality of life, that find challenge, find something rich and interesting to do. My second thought and a question to you around Fischer Random is a trade-off between familiarity and novelty. See, in classical chess today, you have an audience. We have a spectator sport that has emerged around chess pretty much for the first time in world history. And for that, the familiarity of the old style chess, it could be rapid, it could be blitz. The familiarity of the chessboard matters particularly for the Aam Janta. So when a person like me looks at the board, my knowledge levels are very low. So then it's a very simple and familiar arrangement, that it's a board I've seen all my life and I have gathered some knowledge, which brings me to the point of appreciating that. When I see Fischer Random games, I just feel out of my depth. So are we losing something in that novelty familiarity trade-off, and are we running the risk of being less fun for an audience?
So I will just say that you made a great point. I hadn't thought of it before, but also my instinctive answer to it is not really, because whenever I watch, the freestyle chess that has been happening recently, or Fischer Random Championships from the past, Chess 960, what makes it come alive for me is a commentary. There are good commentators, the David Howells and the Peter Swidlers and the Tanya Sachdevs of the world are really good commentators, and they are using computers and they're explaining to us. And my proposition to you is that without great commentary, we would be as lost when Gukesh and Ding play classical chess, because hey, we have no, we can broadly look at it and we can see a mate in two, but beyond that, all the positional nuances, the tactical nuances, we don't get it anyway. We rely on the commentary to do that, and I feel that the commentary plays that same role. And in fact, my last chapter will talk about commentary a bit, but yeah, so that.
Okay, Amit, now I want to turn to the Magnus Gate. Okay, chess has long had great ambassadors. Okay, other than some Bobby Fischer tantrums, we've generally had just good guys, people you look up to as good human beings, Kasparov, Anand, all these guys. And Magnus was just such a wonderful, happy, magnanimous, well-behaved person. And then it all went to hell. So tell us what happened and what is your psychoanalysis?
It's a very sad story. I've always enjoyed, Magnus as a player and as a person, right? Sometimes he could be a little bit arrogant, but he's the best player in the world and he's entitled to, he's kind of earned it, so it's okay. He earns it every day on the board,
Yeah.
so you get a little bit of it. But here's the thing, you know, his enormous success also gives him enormous power. A number of things have happened. One, he is easily the greatest player of all time in my view. Now you can argue vis-a-vis Kasparov, Fischer, whatever, but in my view, the greatest player of all time. And also, he's been dominant in world chess over the last 15 years, right? He's always had a rating anywhere from 2870 to 2830 now, and everyone has been far below, and various people will go to world number 2, drop back down. You'll have, world number 2 to world number 15 is just a revolving door of various people: Caruana, Nakamura, Dingleren, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, Anish Giri, Arjun Erigaisi. They've all been number 2. They've all dropped back, even Wesley. So, it's a revolving cast. But he's been, they might be equals, they might be a first among equals, but he's well above them. That gives him status. Secondly, he's become a business figure where he just started take, and, he runs tournaments and he does other stuff, and he's just a powerful person within the game as well as being a big commercial draw. Now, I feel that power can affect people in negative ways. I'll come at you with an example from 2022. In September 2022, the Sinquefield Cup was going on, and Magnus was playing a young man named Hans Niemann there, an American grandmaster, and he lost to Niemann. And then he dropped out of the tournament and refused to play further, calling Niemann a cheat, right? And his logic, which I then at that moment agreed with, but not for too long, is that the game was very suspicious. The way Niemann played was very suspicious. Some were computer-like moves. Humans wouldn't think in that way. So it is, that part one. And part two is that Niemann had a history of cheating. He was known as having been an online cheat on chess.com, and that was indisputable. Niemann himself in an interview later said that, yeah, he had cheated in a bunch of games in chess.com, but it was in the past. When you are young, when you're 14, 15 years old, shit happens. I think both you and I agree that people should get a shot at redemption. Niemann's claim was that all that was in the past, it's not happening now. And Carlsen and his coterie, as it turns out, absolutely refused that. And they were like, no, how can you play at this level? How can you play moves like this? Blah, blah, blah. At that point, it seemed to me that, Carlsen's reputation was impeccable. Grandmasters know when something fishy is up. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Today, I don't. In fact, just after 2-3 months of that, I stopped doing that because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If somebody is cheating over the board, you got to tell me how. You got to at least have a theory for how, right? Games, including in many tournaments where Niemann has done spectacularly well, are a live broadcast with a delay. So if there is an accomplice outside, he is looking at what has happened half an hour ago. He can't help you in that moment with the best analysis. If he sends you a signal, how does the signal get to you? Players are checked for phones and any electronic devices. Somebody randomly said he probably had vibrating anal beads, and I remember Elon Musk retweeted that. But shit like that was never serious. They could never prove that he did it. And that makes it very unfair. And Carlsen never apologized. Any of those people never apologized. And I thought that that's just like a terrible power play. You are in a position of such great power. You own the chess world. There is a young man. You have accused him of something terrible. You haven't been able to prove it, right? Sure, he did things in the past, but that's in the past. So that incident happened and was perhaps one example of where he thought that the same rules don't apply. Any other player, if player X accuses player Y, the burden of proof is on player X.
So because
Here
it's Magnus, we gave him the benefit of
we
the
gave
doubt.
him the benefit of the doubt, and the burden of proof becomes on the accused, which is really not fair. So that shit happened. And what happened here, by the way, in the World Bridge Championship, as an aside, is that Niemann actually played Magnus Carlsen in the quarterfinals. First game was a draw. Second game, Niemann won. And the third game, you could see Magnus's hands visibly shaking as he was playing because he was so nervous. He really didn't want to lose this. He went on to win game 3 and 4 because, hey, greatest player of all time. But this happened. Now, two controversies happened in the World Championship. In the World Rapid Championship, it's played over 3 days. 5 games on day 1, 4 games on day 2. So games 6 to 9 on day 2, and then 4 more games. Magnus started really badly. This is critical to note. And this, by the way, has a really large field. Is happening in New York, magnificently well organized by FIDE. They've been planning it for months. A really good job by them. Took place in Wall Street. So Magnus has a terrible day 1. He gets 2.5 points out of 5. Arjun, I think, was half a point behind the leaders at 4 points or whatever. So Magnus is behind. On day 2, he shows up wearing jeans. Otherwise, he's perfectly fine, blazer, boots, but he shows up wearing jeans. And jeans are against the regulations. Now, you and I can argue about the regulations, that does it make sense, why should chess have a dress code, why not jeans. Jimmy Carter famously as a president would wear jeans and therefore made it acceptable. So RIP, since he passed recently. So the rule, I think, is stupid, but the point is the rule is there. Everyone's agreed to the dress code. You have to sign before you join the tournament. Everyone's agreed to the rules and to the dress code. Jan Nepomniachtchi, either that day or the previous day, showed up in sports shoes. He was told, change your sneakers. He did. The players' rooms where they are put up are 3 minutes away from the venue. So at game 6, Magnus was told that, hey, jeans are against the rules. Please change. We understand you can't change immediately, but there are big breaks between games. So just walk over and change. And you don't have to change now. You don't have to change before game 7. You don't have to change before game 8. Please change before game 9. Magnus refuses to do this. It becomes an ego thing. Why should I change? He said in an interview on Take that on principle, I decided not to change. Now, I don't know what this principle is. No one has articulated it, and no one has even asked him, which is indicative that what is this principle that on principle you refuse to follow a rule. Because FIDE's hands are kind of stuck here, that they have to treat everyone equally. They can't say you're the world champion, you're okay, you wear whatever the hell you want, and others have to change. So they refused to pair him for game 9. They said, we'll only make a pairing with your name in it. If you change, you haven't changed, you're welcome to join the next day. Please come in jeans. So Magnus withdraws from that tournament. He withdraws from the World Blitz, which was going to start 2 days later. And then he goes on Take, and he says, fuck you to FIDE in exactly these many words. We'll link all these videos from the show notes, right? So this happens and everybody is like, what the hell? And this is what I would call Jeansgate. And the next day, right, or maybe within 24 hours, the next day the Rapid Championship ends, won by this wonderful guy called Volodar Murzin, and Magnus was not in contention to win it by then. He'd done badly on day 2 as well, which brings to mind the question that had he been doing well, would he have done this tantrum? I don't think so. He was doing badly, he was in a bad mood, and hey, I'm the star. And after the tournament got over, then came news that Magnus has agreed to rejoin the Blitz and he'll be allowed to wear jeans. He gave an interview on Take. Again, we'll link that from the show notes, where he basically said that, that he spoke to the president of FIDE, Dvorkovich, who is a reasonable guy. Now, a little bit of context. FIDE has a president called Arkady Dvorkovich, by all accounts a good administrator and a good guy. Their CEO is a respected GM called Emil Sutovsky. Their vice president is Vishy Anand, right? So Magnus gets along with Dvorkovich. Now, in this interview, he said that when the whole jeans kerfuffle happened, Dvorkovich was asleep. He was not at the venue. He was asleep. That's why it happened, because there are no grown-ups in FIDE. His words, no grown-ups in FIDE. And then he said Vishy Anand tried to speak to him, but he said that Vishy apparently said that the arbiter is following the rules. I can't overturn his decision unilaterally, which is completely fair. And Magnus quotes Vishy on this and says that this shows that whatever his good qualities may be, he is not good enough for this job. He's not up for this job, right? He says about Vishy, right? And then he takes off against Emil Sutovsky, and they have some prior beef, and he goes nuts against him. So that shit happens, and so he goes over there, heads to Dvorkovich, and Dvorkovich says, okay, play. And again, Sutovsky, if you see his interviews throughout this time, complete gentleman, right? Vishy, I don't think, gave an interview after this as of Jan 3 when we are speaking, but we know Vishy. He's a complete gentleman. This is an outrageous thing to say. It's outrageous behavior. Even if he believes these things, you have to behave with some dignity. You can't say this shit, the president of the CEO of FIDE, Emil Sutovsky, is a strong GM. He's senior to Magnus, organized this great event, done an amazing job. You may hate him personally. Just be diplomatic, just be polite. Vishy Anand, lost the world championship to you when he was 44, but one of the 5 greatest players of all time, and just be decent. If you look at how the Indians behave, Vishy and all the other Indians down, they are gentlemen. They would never do something like this. But Magnus does this, and it is deplorable. This is not the end of it, right? The World Bridge Championship happens. On day 1, the 13 rounds are played, from which the top 8 players qualify for the next day. Magnus qualifies, so does Hans Niemann. Jan Nepomniachtchi qualifies. Jean-Christophe Duda, who helped Gukesh win the World Championship, qualifies. So the next day there's a quarterfinal where Magnus manages to get ahead of Niemann. There's a semi-final. Then there's a final. Jan Nepomniachtchi, who's lost, I think, 5 World Championship finals of different World Championship types to Magnus. And there's Magnus. And Magnus wins the first two games. It's a 4-game match. Magnus wins the first two games. Jan plays a brilliancy in game 3, comes back, and then he wins game 4 as well. Now the rule is sudden death tiebreaker. Now some tournaments have an Armageddon. But over here, you don't have an Armageddon where one game would definitely decide it. Armageddon basically is both players bid for a time with black that is less than the time white will get. The lowest bid gets that time, and then they have to draw with black. So if they draw with black, they win the title. Otherwise, white wins the title, whoever was white. They don't have that here for whatever reason. They have sudden death. They play one game, they play 2 games, they play 3 games, they're all draws. And then Magnus turns to Jan and says that, why don't we split the title? And Jan says, yeah, I would like that. So then Magnus turns to the arbiter and says, I would like to split the title. And the arbiter says, I'll have to ask FIDE. So the arbiter goes off to ask the authorities. By this time, as you would have realized, everybody is shit scared of doing anything without Dvorkovich saying whatever, because now, they've already been superseded once. Now, this is an outrageous demand by a player. Let's split the title. Nobody freaking does this. Hundreds of players came here all the way to New York. They play the tournament. You bloody well have a goddamn winner. This is unprecedented. The rules have, no stipulation of this sort, right? Dvorkovich, however, says that, okay, let's tie it, they tie it, that's okay. Then later, and they share the title. Later, this clip comes out, I think taken by Chessbase India, perhaps by the Sagar Shah himself. I don't know if he was there, but one of the Chessbase India people shoots this 12-minute video of that interim period where Magnus and Jan are waiting for FIDE to respond. And they capture this moment where Magnus goes to Jan and he tells him that if FIDE refuses, let us just play one short draw after another. Right? And this is outrageous. The clip obviously is all over the internet. It goes viral. It's just terrible behavior. And Emil Sutovsky, who's the CEO, now also loses it and says, like, what the hell is this? Not in so many words, but, what on earth is this? How can you do this? It's basically a kind of match fixing. It's holding the organization to ransom. It is such bad behavior. Magnus comes out with a claim saying, hey, I was joking. Right? Which, I mean, do you take it at face value? I don't know. Right? And I am reminded now of a quote by Hans Niemann, who also obviously ranted and raved against this. When Niemann once put this tweet, where Niemann said that if I say something and you disagree with me, take my name away from it and just look at what I said in isolation and then evaluate it. Right? And similarly, in the case of everything that Magnus has done, I would say forget it is Magnus Carlsen, forget it's the greatest player of all time, forget it is the world number one. Is it appropriate behavior? Is terrible behavior? And the great lesson here is that we should be aware. We should be aware of the poisonous nature of power and success. They say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely, it is not just in the context of somebody being powerful in a government and being corrupt. Power corrodes character. And we should watch out for this in ourselves. Like I did an episode recently with our mutual friend Salil Tripathi. It's an episode of The Seen and the Unseen, released a few days from now. It's not out yet. It's the next Seen Unseen episode to come out. And Salil told 2 stories in that episode, right? Salil was a journalist. He's been a journalist since the 1970s, worked in human rights. The first was a conference of Václav Havel when he was the head of state of Czechoslovakia. And Havel was giving a press conference, possibly in some European location, maybe Geneva or something, where there were other international leaders. And that afternoon, Havel was due to meet Lee Kuan Yew, who was then First Minister of Singapore. So the question that, so at the press conference, Salil asked Havel the question that there are some people who argue that free speech is not the most important right, that you have to feed people first. What is your view on this? And Havel said no. Free speech is the most important right, because without free speech, how will a hungry man even be able to communicate that he's hungry, right? And then Havel gives that answer, and then he turns to Salil and says, but who argues like that? And Salil said, the person you're meeting this afternoon, Lee Kuan Yew. So there's silence in the hall, and then Havel says, in that case, I will make sure I tell him that he's wrong. Right? And I love this little anecdote. It tells you about what a principled man Havel was. I want to contrast this with another story Salil told me. And this was about Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela is now president, and he's going on a tour of the ASEAN countries, I think at a time when Aung San Suu Kyi is still in prison. So at a press conference, Salil asked the question that President Mandela, when you go to all these countries and meet their leaders, are you going to protest against the treatment given to Aung San Suu Kyi, who's still in jail? And Mandela confers with his aides, and then he says no. So Salil continues that, sir, when you were in prison for 35 years, we all spoke, even though I came late, we all spoke for you, for your rights. Why will you not speak for her rights? And then Mandela says that that was prisoner Mandela. This is President Mandela. I am imprisoned by the presidency. It's a glib answer. It's a disgusting answer, right? This shows how power changes you. At one point, you claim to have principles, you claim to believe in certain things, but power changes everyone. Power is so deeply dangerous and corrosive. So, my life lesson here is that, be aware of what power and success can do to you. So much of success is luck. Carlsen was just born a genius, and then of course he worked hard and he did all the other things right. But all the other top players worked as hard, right? He was lucky. You get lucky, you get success, you get power, you make a lot of money. That doesn't mean that you behave in these ways. And this isn't going to last, right? There are a bunch of Indians knocking on the door. Forget whether it is an Indian or whether it is other.
5 years is all we give.
Yeah, whether it is other players, they're going to overtake him. And what Magnus Carlsen is going to become one day? He's going to become Vladimir Kramnik. Vladimir Kramnik, great player, ex-world champion, beat Kasparov, pioneer of the revived the Berlin defense. And today, he is a madman.
Yeah,
he's an embittered madman. He's accused Nakamura of cheating, the brilliant Daniel Narodowski of cheating. He's accused Gukesh of cheating, right? He just can't take it that he's not at the top anymore. He's gone mad, you know and that's it. That's what power does to you. When you're on top, you're arrogant, you're the king of the world. When you go down, you can't take it anymore. And the way to handle power is the way Vishy Anand has handled power. Do you think Vishy Anand doesn't have power? Oh man, he has power, but you would never know. He's so polite, so soft spoken, works hard behind the scenes. He set up Waka with Westbridge. Everything Gukesh has done, all these young players have done, they all adore him. That's what you do with power. So this is not per se a lesson for Magnus. Maybe it is a moment. In fact, in that last day of Blitz, he seemed super stressed out throughout. I don't know what's going on with him. So one hopes that he comes out of this phase. But my life lesson in general for all of us, for all of you, is that beware of power and success, changing you.
Very well, Amit. What is our next lesson from chess of 2024?
So I want to talk about computers a bit and coverage a bit, right? In our last episode on chess, we spoke about the role of computers in playing and in pedagogy and all of that. But I also want to speak about it in terms of coverage, right? One of the best moments of the World Championship, obviously for those who like Gukesh, is that blunder. Now, I remember watching that blunder on Sagar Shah's stream, and the moment that move was made, the computer evaluation changes on the screen, and everybody stands up. I think only Tanya looked at the board and figured it out. Even Sagar, if you see that clip, he's looking for a moment at the computer to make sure what is a blunder. And what has happened there is that Sagar Shah, and I'll speak about him in the next chapter, is a pioneer in using computers well in coverage, in educating, in illuminating. I mean, he's done a service to humanity, frankly, yeah. But there are times where computers can become a crutch and not a tool. And this is one of those moments. So my life lesson from here is that no matter how you use technology in your life, don't let that technology become a crutch and not a tool. Tools are great. Tools help us. Use ChatGPT to write to help you with give ideas and to polish your prose. But you have to have the final word. You have to do the writing because you have to keep your brain working. If you use it as a crutch, you dumb yourself down. So that moment in the coverage for me, like if you
one step stronger, you stop experiencing life.
You stop experiencing life, and because you're not thinking about the chess. And if you look at the coverage with David Howell, the gap between and they didn't have the computer eval on. So Howell took as much time to figure out it's a blunder as Gukesh did. You can actually time them. Both of them got it in pretty much the same time because Howell is thinking on his own, and I like that kind of coverage. And my big life lesson here is, and this is, by the way, an aberration. Chess-Base India and Sagar Shah are absolutely outstanding, and he's just so good at explaining stuff on the chess. he really gets the game. But I sometimes worry about these things, that there's an entire audience of people. It matters how we watch also. There's an entire audience of people which is reacting to computer evaluation. Computer evaluations are fucking meaningless at some level. Players might deliberately play a suboptimal move, or the computer calls something suboptimal, but in that moment, because your opponent is on time pressure, you want to complicate things for him, so you play the move you do, and not whatever is a computer best choice by 0.1%. It doesn't matter. And yet we become a crutch. So somebody deviates from computer, you'll be like, oh, Gukesh made a blunder. Or somebody like sometimes when Gukesh made the top move of the computer, everybody would clap. I'm like, are you guys morons? There are probably 4 or 5 moves which are fine here. Gukesh is not making this move for those reasons. He hasn't seen that. It's the game is much more nuanced, and I feel that even in our coverage, we run the risk of dumbing it down. Like, as a viewer, I would advise you, if you're watching chess, that watch coverage that doesn't have the comp evaluation on, that has strong grandmasters talking about a position, and once in a while they may refer to the computer evaluation to give extra insight. But if you're just looking at that bar, I just feel that's a bad way to watch.
Agree. And Amit, what's your last life lesson from chess of 2024?
So one of the most beautiful little clips that I saw after Gukesh won was Sagar Shah and Amruta Mokal flying down to Singapore the very next morning, and then they meet him, and Sagar hugs him, and then as Gukesh and Sagar are hugging, Gukesh looks at Amrita, and then he goes and hugs Amrita, and it's a beautiful moment. And it's a beautiful moment because these two are so important. Sagar Shah and Amruta Mokal, his wife, they are so important to Indian chess. There is a clip that had gone viral when I posted it on Twitter also, of an interview with an 11-year-old Gukesh by Sagar Shah. And Sagar asked Gukesh, what do you want to be later in life? And Gukesh says, I want to be the youngest world champion. Right? And here we are. And there's another long extended clip, we'll link it from the show notes, where at that same under 11 national championship, Sagar, who is higher rated than all the players there, is explaining positions to all of these players as the kids are gathered around him. So there you see Gukesh, there you see Pranav, there you see Leon Luke Mendonca, another great talent, right? They're all there, they're sitting on the floor, they're watching. Back in the distance, you see Gukesh's dad. Is glorious. And I want to talk about Sagar and Amruta because I think if you had to give a Bharat Ratna for chess, you and I have been fans of Vishy Anand for 30 years, we'd give it to Vishy. But if you had to give a second one, we'd give it to these two. Because what Sagar did was, I followed him from those early days, right? And he's not a super strong GM. He's an international master, tried to become a GM. He's not at that level as a player. And he doesn't have that technology and that great equipment and the 4K cameras that we shoot with and these great mics. Not back then. Often he would just go and he would shoot with his mobile phone, using the sound of the mobile phone. He would get interviews wherever he can, and he would have no shame in speaking to the smallest kid and saying, tell me about how you were thinking, tell me about this. He would go and talk to the women and talk about their experiences and what's going on. And both Sagar and Amruta, they set up Chess Base India. For years as a labor of love, they ran it. You and I speak about playing the long game, they played the long game. First 3, 4, 5 years, I don't think the views went anywhere. During COVID, it did. The comedian Samir Raina, another fantastic force in Indian chess, had a part to play in that. Now they've exploded, they've got millions of subscribers. He still acts incredibly humble, still one of those people. I haven't met him, but you can make out just looking at him on YouTube that, man, these two are really good human beings. And my life lesson here is that love is all you need. He did all this for the love of chess. I don't think he ever thought that I'm going to become a big channel, I'll have 2 million subscribers, I'll build a business, I'll make money. He did it because he loved chess. And year after year, he went to all these arenas, the under 11 championship, this district championship, here and there, and just talking to people, shooting with his phone, just doing this shit. And this is why, and he's played a huge role in Indian chess, and you cannot quantify that. And that's my last lesson, that, people overthink. When they want to do something, when they want to get into something, they overthink. They say, is there a market for this? Will this work? Aisa karu ya vaisa karu? What if I make a fool of myself? Am I good enough? Etc. etc. And Sagar and Amruta showed us a way by diving into something for the love of it. And that's my lesson to everyone. If you're watching this, that's all you need. Act today, have a bias for action, do what you love, things will work out.
And a subsidiary lesson, what you said a moment ago, that there is a tremendous role for the community organizer people. That it's not only the direct doers like Anand and Westbridge, but it is also the people who will tend to the community, who will keep the morale and the enthusiasm going. That's how it all comes together.
It takes a village.